Hi everyone, my name is Kevin Ho, and today I'll be talking about the over-reliance of Chinese and Indian manufacturers of drugs, a recipe for public health disaster. So to explain the phenomenon, we see that roughly 90% of all medications dispensed in the American pharmacies are generic. Over the last 10 years, generic drugs helped the US healthcare system save nearly $2 trillion. US national health spending projected to reach about $6.2 trillion by 2028 from the $3.6 trillion as seen in 2018. Generic medications are an absolute necessity. China and India are currently the manufacturers of generic medications, and India is a leading manufacturer of finished drug products, or FDP, bound to the United States. China is the world's largest supplier of active pharmaceutical ingredients, the raw materials for manufacturing our FDPs in India, and our own drugs here in the US. The problem with overseas generic manufacturing is summarized into the three following categories. There is a rising diplomatic tension with China as the world's largest supplier of API. There's also a lack of oversight on foreign generic manufacturers, and there's a lack of strategic supply management during emergencies. So before I go into the recipe for disaster, I'd just like to highlight this quote down on the bottom left of this poster. It says that if China shut the door on exports of medicines and their key ingredients and raw materials, US hospitals and military hospitals and clinics would cease to function within months, if not days. That just really shows how much we rely on China. And to go further into that, the first step of the recipe is explaining our reliance on China and India. 13% of the US's APIs come from China, while 18% of the US's APIs come from India. But also 11% of the US total finished drug products come from India, who also heavily relies on China for their APIs to make all these FDPs. Now, these percentages don't seem like a lot when you say them, but when you factor in hundreds and thousands of drugs, then we're talking about a few hundred drugs that could be on shortage if they were to shut their communications with us. Now, the second um, recipe is there's a lack of trust with overseas products. So there's quality control issues with these Chinese active pharmaceutical ingredients. In 2008, there were sudden anaphylactoid reactions seen in patients in the US who received heparin, and as a result, 100 people died. And in 2017, the FDA inspected a Chinese active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturer called Seijing Huahei Pharmaceuticals Corporation and found that they omitted from official test results the drug batches failed to meet US quality standards and instead recorded passing grades. Active pharmaceutical ingredients for angiotensin II receptor blockers had an unacceptable high level of MDMA, which is a potential carcinogen. And it goes to show that if we use some of these products, then it could be potentially hazardous in the US. And then the third step is a lack of emergency or crisis plan. As of March 11th, 2020, the US has had 99 drug shortages. Some of these drugs that were shorted are azithromycin tablets, or even dexamethasone sodium phosphate injections, which is an approved treatment for COVID. Many of these are a direct result of the US dependence on China for all these critical drugs. If the US continues to face diplomatic tensions with China during a pandemic like COVID-19, then the US will lose a significant amount of medicine that all the patients in the US need on a daily basis to survive. So what's next? What's the emergency preparedness aspect of this presentation? So the US should implement a federal initiative to develop our generic drugs for high demand medications. And then the US manufacturers should expand to producing our own supply of APIs. We don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket in China. We want to have a good amount here in the US so that in the case where our network, our system, or our trades are interrupted, our communications with China, then we have something to rely on. We don't have all these drugs that are shorted. And California is an example because they are attempting to create their own line of generic drugs. The US can begin to acquire a reservoir through all these processes, and that reservoir will be essential during a crisis such as COVID-19. This will alleviate the US reliance on Indian finished drug products, while also easing the reliance on China's exports of APIs. So then another issue or another part that we can also resolve is to bring our overseas manufacturers back to the US or to start operating in other countries that will consent to increased FDA oversight. As we saw, the lack of oversight caused a lack of trust with Chinese manufacturers in their APIs because there are impurities in our finished drug products and our APIs. We don't want those unacceptable high levels of carcinogens like NDMA in our finished drug products. So this will decrease the chance of these impurities in our FDPs, and it also ensures manufacturing maintains FDA standards for quality control and quality assurance. And all this could be done using tax incentives to support the US manufacturing and try to get more companies to open up here in the US or in other places that will comply or consent to the FDA oversight. I'd like to thank Dr. White and Human Kashi for all the help on this project as well. Thank you for listening.